Hello there. I haven't done a video for, I don't know, a couple weeks now. Last time I did a video was about Neptune, and I was just kind of doing a deep dive on the Neptune archetype. And since then, we had whatever, spring equinox, and now it's Aries season. And more recently, Mercury is ingressed into Aries, and Mercury is in the part of its cycle where it's moving really fast. It's actually not. It's not going to spend very much time in Aries at all. I'm going to show you on my application here just how fast it's moving. Um, but before Mercury was in Aries, Mercury was in Pisces, and Pisces is not good dignity for Mercury. Um, the it's said to be both the fall and the detriment at the same time, which is interesting because it's like a kind of a quirk of astrology that Mercury in Pisces is the only placement that has both of these negative dignities at the same time. So it's but like, and that's something that I was like, I don't know. I mean, I to be honest, I I feel like I could be doing more astrology videos because within the period of time, all the things going on. I mean, all you have to do is go over to Achuta. This is the guy that I got my certification from. Like Achuta is, I don't know. I can't compare myself to him. He to me it feels like he's got his shit together and he's making videos all the time and he's a active like parent guy who has his life together. I kind of sort of relate more to being somebody. I don't know. Screw it. I'm recovering from being sick anyways, and my basic attitude this year when it comes to astrology is that I'm not going to be too hard on myself, and I'm just going to do astrology videos to the rate that I see fit. But I kind of there's certain things that I missed. I didn't get a chance to talk about like now Mercury is in Aries, out away from Pisces. I don't think Mercury and Pisces is actually that bad for certain things. Especially if you're having conversations that kind of go into like deeper territory or more like I don't know, strange and unusual conversation topics or things to do with maybe like religion or paranormal stuff. That kind of Neptune flavor coming in there. It's like it's not that bad, but there are some things that are um like I ordered some music gear on a pre-order and it's like taking forever and like expecting things to get delivered, not so good. And oh, there's this other thing that I can tell you about. I don't want to go on like spend too much time in my astrology video on this topic, but I'll try to give you the short version. Um in the local town that I live in, like a stone's throw away from my house, there is a hospice where people who are elderly or ill and palliative care on the verge of death basically, that's where they get care. It's actually really close to the local community hospital where I was staying while I was sick last year. um, and the long and the short of it is that a Christian fundamentalist organization basically made a move on this hospice a number of years ago, and it was taken over by people who have a big problem against this thing called like medically assisted dying. It's basically like a legal euthanasia that's applied for people who have like really bad terminal illnesses. If you've been struggling with health problems for a long time and you just want, it's just like, pointless suffering to continue your life, there's a legal option for euthanasia. So there's no point of just keeping people alive suffering needlessly. And I don't even have like super strong opinions about this, but it's kind of weird that there's like the religious people who took it over, even though this is just like a hospice in our local community, like I said, in my neighborhood, within walking distance from my house, it's like they're getting people like from around like the world because they don't have any. they don't have, in the hospice societies thing, there's no rule that you have to live in the town to be a member on the board. But they're getting like 3,000, they're getting like thousands and thousands. Apparently there's like over 10,000 members that, and like they're pooling people from around the world just for in this small town that they can like fight like assisted suicide in this one hospice in this one small town. And it's like, you're like, so if people in this local community go to this one hospice, they're having all their decisions about this being determined by a network of religious people that have no basis in the community, which is kind of strange. But the stuff about look, first of all, suicide itself, I have noticed, has a certain Neptune quality to it. So that conversations and things to do with this topic of suicide or assisted dying, very Neptunian in quality. And basically they were going to pass, like, they're going to have a meeting where they had all these people vote on this issue. And I joined in there to try to vote. And there was it was on for like 2 or 3 hours, but it just got postponed because so many people were having technical problems with the meeting. And I was like, wow, I mean, I don't expect Christian fundamentalists necessarily to hire astrologers to plan their events, but it's a good example anyways of Mercury in Pisces, and it's caught up with that Neptune stuff. So it brings in the kind of religious fundamentalism and those qualities, and the stuff to do with death and dying and what's right about how to handle end of life care and all this kind of stuff. It all thematically ties in very well. But if you're trying to make a decisive decision and have people vote and have things work out, like having Mercury in its complete place of detriment and exile, I would not expect a very good result for having a meeting like that. And it basically turned out as I would have expected, that it just took so long and people got so bogged down with technical difficulties they have to re-adjourn the meeting for next week. So I was kind of like curious about the astrology behind all this, and I looked at it and I was like, whoa, this is really interesting, because when they re-adjourn the meeting there's a Mercury is out of Pisces, and it's in a Cazimi with this. Cazimi is conjunct the sun, but Chiron is also conjunct in Aries, and Aries is much more decisive. It's much more like Austin Coppock in his stuff about the 36 decans. He talks about how the first decan of Aries is like the battle axe. So it's immediately this kind of like, instead of the soupy, like mystical, like we don't know what's going on, what's the true nature of reality in Pisces, like Aries has this qualities that's much more like thunk, like chomp, like it's there's no wasting time on needless conversation. It's like thunk, like the hammer coming down, and decisive action and decisive. So as I'm expecting that when this meeting is re-adjourned, there's more of a decisive thing coming through rather than. It'll be a very different flavor. But it was interesting that the day that they decided to have the meeting, I also noticed Mercury was on the anaretic degree. So and also apparently they're like, this meeting has been a long time coming, and they kind of they're doing the meeting at the very latest date possible, and that if they can't have a meeting to vote, then they're kind of like in contempt of the you have to be accountable to the members of the board and all. And if you can't have a meeting, then you got a big problem there. So I don't know. I don't want to spend any more time talking about this, but it's part of what drew my attention to the fact that there's some interesting Mercury dynamics going on with Mercury. First of all, getting caught up with Neptune and Pisces, then leaving Pisces, then going into Aries. And I'll take you to the app to kind of show you some stuff going on. I might as well do that now. Okay, so this is the current chart for when I'm making this astrology video, and Mercury's already at 4 degrees of Aries. Let's rewind. So if we rewind back to Saturday, this was when they were having that meeting. Mercury crosses the point into Aries Sunday, early the wee hours of Sunday morning. And So you can see that as March 27th. And then Mercury's just racing through Aries here if I keep progressing day by day. And eventually... See, look, April 11th. Only 11 days in Aries, and Mercury is already into Taurus. This is basically the fast part of the Mercury synodic cycle. And it's part of the reason why Mercury gets the associations it does. Mercury is associated with Quicksilver, the messenger. It's like speedy. And also, I should remind you that it's currently, I'll just refresh here, it's currently in Aries, which is a Mars-ruled sign. And as such, the sign of the warrior, kind of this masculine yangy kind of thing. There's a lot more energy behind Mercury, I find, right now. I mean, the thing is, it is combust with the sun, and in some way that will kind of like... It's like the kind of thing, like, if you're moving really fast, you may not be very, like, focused or concentrated, or there's a sort of, like, the glare, the blinding light of the sun kind of weakens things a bit, but it's sort of like you're just blazing right through it, basically. And when I have some horoscope readings to do as well. And when I was writing them, I don't know, it was just like, they just flew off the page, basically, or flew onto the page. It was like, there's definitely more of a sense of speed, I think, with this fast Mercury in Aries and out of Pisces now. At the same time, though, the ruler of Aries is Mars, and Mars is approaching Saturn. So there's this kind of thing where... Oh man, there's still this sort of sense of that frustration because Mars kind of wants to push through an obstacle and Saturn kind of represents an obstacle. The good news, I guess, is that Venus is finally out of that enclosure between Saturn and Mars. It's at 22, so Venus has finally crossed that point. I'm kind of getting to other stuff now, but this is kind of like this is kind of what hasn't changed so much because we still have this sort of cluster of Aquarius stuff, which I think kind of came to a forefront when we had the Oscars a couple of nights ago. Because when you saw, I think it was the 27th here, the moon was into, yeah, I mean, Venus was basically conjunct Saturn, and you see all that the stuff about whatever Will Smith being uptight about Jada's perhaps hair loss being, Venus Saturn, the beautiful woman approaching either some sort of health issue or something to do with aging. That's very Venus Saturn stuff. And you throw Mars in there with a good smack, like it's very like on the point astrology. I'm kind of getting, but that kind of came to a point with what we could see with the Oscars as, Mercury early into Aries as that was happening. And eventually, though, we're going to also have Venus. Here we go. Venus, April 5th, is finally in Pisces. Venus exalted, which is nice. At the time, though, Mars and Saturn are perfectly conjunct. So that's, oh boy. Like, I mean, good for Pisces stuff, but for fixed sign Aquarius stuff, it could be a tense moment. But then eventually, it won't be that long, and Mars is in Pisces as well. And then we've got another stellium in Pisces again for April, leading into this, we've got Jupiter, Neptune happening, and then we're going to have Venus, Jupiter. We've got lots of stuff coming up. So this is just kind of a general preview of what's going on for Aries season. I've wound up on the full moon here, just out of, coincidence. So you can see what the full moon of this lunation is going to look like, but I don't know. This is a quick view, anyways, of the astrology going on. For this particular video, or I should say the horoscopes that I'm going to do, I think I'm going to focus more on this stuff about the upcoming Mercury Cazimi, because that kind of caught my attention. If we scroll back here, so we have a new moon coming up. And on the new moon, basically, so here's the oh, hold on, I guess that's also the new moon here. On April 1st, Mercury isn't perfectly conjunct the sun, but on April 2nd, there's 12 degrees, 12 degrees, 12 degrees all in Aries, which is an interesting thing. It stands out for me because, like, I mean, Mercury Cazimi is kind of an interesting thing to work with, but it's Mercury Cazimi with Chiron getting in there. And Chiron is an asteroid. I don't even know if asteroids follow the same rules by Cazimi, but if it's the fact that they're all perfect on the 12 degree, it's definitely something worth paying attention to. And in my opinion, I find that Chiron works really well when I include it in readings, so I'm going to include it. I also think that the other asteroids potentially could work as well. I'm not against using the other asteroids, but I just haven't gotten into it yet. Before I go on to, I think it's important for me to sort of acknowledge that in my video that I made about Venus and Mars and Saturn in Aquarius, I didn't talk about Uranus at all, or the square with Uranus, but as I said, I'm basically doing these astrology videos at my own pace right now as I recover my health, and I'm not going to be, I think I said a lot in the video that I did do, and I would probably just have to, I don't know, whatever. I'm not making a video on that right now. There's other astrologers you can look at for the Uranus square. I think maybe it may have played into some of the tensions or dynamics going on with the war in Russia. But in general, my general point of the Uranus square is that if you bring in Hellenistic aspect doctrine with the superior position that Saturn is in the dominating position, Aquarius versus Taurus. If it was a Taurus rising chart, Aquarius would be in the 10th house, meaning that it's upon the 10th, meaning that Aquarius has a lot more. Aquarius has the edge over Taurus in squares if you use traditional aspect doctrine. And for that reason, I don't really, I think that Uranus is a sort of hopeful quality. It can be disruptive, but I think ultimately Uranus is trying to liberate one from fixed patterns and try to freshen things up a bit more. But I think that with the whole Venus, Mars, Saturn stuff that we've had going on, it sort of just seems to add to the frustration because Uranus is this thing like wanting to break free, whereas the strongest element is the Saturn element, which is kind of has this sort of traditional, restrictive, abide by the rules kind of thing. And it's like, yeah, there can be some tensions around that kind of stuff. It'll be nice though because, like I said, everything is moving into Pisces. Venus and Mars are moving into Pisces anyways, so it's going to be less Saturnian time in April, which is something to look forward to. So yeah, I'm just kind of giving a general update right now because I kind of feel like there's a lot of stuff that I haven't been as up on. But I've prepared some 12 sign horoscope readings, so I might as well get into that now. Okay, so I'm doing Cancer Rising, doing it Thema Mundi style, starting with Cancer Rising. And this new moon in Aries is happening in the 10th house. The 10th house is an angular house. So that means that it's an important transit for Cancer Risings, primarily focusing on public life and career. And because it's not just a new moon, but we have a Mercury Cazimi, as well as Chiron getting in on the mix, that I would expect there being some kind of decisive action in the workplace or something to do with your public career life, putting yourself out there. It would be a good time perhaps for initiating some kind of a new beginning or having some kind of a public statement. However, Chiron is in the mix, and Chiron is the wounded healer, showing that there may be something coming up in this transit that has to do with areas where there may be some kind of insecurity or some kinds of problems we don't like to look at or we don't like to deal with, where we might feel like we are deficient and we need to be in need of improvement or something in the work, career, public life area. And it could be a time of a critical insight around all this as Mercury comes through with the Cazimi. I've been applying this method known as lichen girding, where we look at what other signs Mercury rules. In this case, it rules the 12th house and the 3rd house. So the 12th house has to do with isolation and dreams and things like that, and the 3rd house has to do with siblings, your neighbors, your kind of local environment and stuff like that. So there's certain things that could be, are there clues and dreams coming up about your work life? Or is there some way that your work life is connected to your local community involvement, maybe with the 3rd house, or your associations with people who play a role in your life that are kind of like brothers and sisters or peers or neighbors or something like that. These sort of things could play an influence if we use the technique of lichen girding to have a closer look at what's coming through with Mercury. Okay. Okay, now this is actually kind of a cool transit for Leo risings, because if you're Leo rising, this new moon in Aries is happening in your 9th house, and there's going to be a Mercury Cazimi conjunct with Chiron at the same time. So if we look at new moon as initiating new beginnings, it could be a good time to initiate something new, but there's something coming through with Mercury Cazimi, like an insight or a kind of a breakthrough. And it's really cool for this happening in the 9th house, because the 9th house has to do with sort of like higher visions, like a visionary experience. Or it also has to do with your guiding principles in your life. So there's certain things that I might recommend, either like spending some time in a kind of a meditative contemplation, or with Mercury, even maybe journaling might be a good thing. But it's an opportunity for some kind of a message to come through that could sort of like have to do with the higher principles that guide your life or your sense of spiritual connection. And it's all very strong energies. I mean, you also keep in mind, you also have a Jupiter-Neptune conjunction happening this month as well. So the whole area of sort of higher principles, visionary experiences, mystical stuff is all very highly charged for Leo risings at this particular time. So yeah, I don't know. That's a cool one for Leo. If you look at, I'm applying this technique this time called lichen girding to Mercury, which is going to be in Cazimi. And Mercury, I mean, this is kind of like the day before it goes Cazimi, up on the screen here. But if you look at which signs Mercury rules, you'll notice that Gemini rules the 11th house, and Virgo rules the 2nd house. So although spirituality and higher principles, and so this is more, seems like kind of abstract or transcendent kind of stuff, the 11th house here is more to do with your social connections, and the 2nd house has to do with your ability to provide for yourself, to make money for yourself, and stuff like that. So normally I would actually be kind of hesitant about mixing in the transcendent principles of the 9th house with the practical money-making stuff, but if we apply this lake and girding technique, there could be Mercury is the ruler of these areas of life. Mercury, for a Leo rising, Mercury, the domain of money making and the domain of being associated with groups and larger organizations. This is all of Mercury's domain, and Mercury is going to be empowered by this Cazimi. So I'm just throwing this in as an extra tip that you may not get from other astrologers who don't use these techniques, just to add more value to your horoscope reading, which you're getting for free, mind you. Next chart. For Virgo rising, this new moon in Pisces is taking place in the 8th house. Now, do not be alarmed, but the 8th house does have to do with dark and heavy topics such as death and fear of death and all sorts of stuff like that. It does not necessarily mean you're going to die or anything like that, but who knows? I mean, I don't know. Maybe this critical new moon in the 8th house, the 8th house often has to stand for things like inheritance too, or managing the estates of those who've passed away and stuff like that. And this could be relevant for some people, and it all depends on your own chart and what's happening in your life and all this kind of stuff. Whether or not it has to do with literal death or the things associated with it. The other way to read it is that the 8th house is a dark and shadowy area because it doesn't have direct contact with the ascendant. In the traditional aspect doctrine, there would be an opposition connecting the Virgo to Pisces, and there would be trines connecting Virgo to the other earth signs of Taurus and Capricorn. But Aries and Aquarius are the blind spots, if you will, as well as the 12th house and the second and stuff. But okay, so the blind spots, though, the 8th house, it's this area where I think the term shadow work is often overused, especially in, I don't know, circles where people do astrology or into Carl Jung and stuff like that. I feel like the term shadow work gets thrown around, and I'm like, how much shadow work are these people really doing anyways, right? Or like, do they really know what they're talking about? Are they really getting into it? But I think the 8th house does have to do with the shadow because it represents this kind of blind spot that we don't see. And there's often sort of, when people talk about unconscious behaviors, right? Which could have to do with addiction, different bad habits and stuff like that are basically there because it's like a coping mechanism to deal with certain things that are difficult in life. But it's like it's sort of like coping with realities you'd rather not face, kind of thing, right? And that's kind of what perpetuates the unconsciousness, where it's kind of like 8th house has this quality of like being in denial of something that you'd rather not see, or maybe at some level that there's a problem but you don't want to admit it, or something like that. Which I think this is really maybe actually useful in a therapeutic sense because we have Mercury and Chiron getting together in this Cazimi. And Chiron is the wounded healer. So there's actually a potential for healing here in these sort of shadowy, unconscious kind of areas. And Mercury's the messenger, communicator. So there's like a potential for a kind of a breakthrough of communication, breakthrough of maybe personal insight. Because keep in mind, Mercury rules the 1st house, which also, I've been doing this thing this time around, applying the principle of like and girding, which means to look at what signs Mercury rules. In this case, if for Virgo, Mercury rules the 1st house and the 10th house, which are both angular houses. They're both critical houses that has to do with the 1st house being self, your self-image, your own body, your own personal agency, and the 10th house being your career, your public life, and all this kind of stuff, which are very much more things that you're actively engaged with, whereas the 8th house is kind of like the dirty secrets you don't want to talk about, maybe, right? But it's like if we clean out the stench sneaking up our basement, in this chart I see that it will actually affect the public life, the career life, the goals and ambitions, as well as your own personal sense of self. So it's not just some back room thing. It actually, with the principle of life converting, we can see this connects completely for the 1st house and the 10th house. So it's in your best interest to take advantage of this transit, to have some critical personal insights of self-healing around 8th house matters and all that. And I'm going to move on to the next one now. Thank you very much. Libra rising. So what can we say, Libra? It's Aries season, and Aries is your 7th house. So we're having lots of Aries action in the house that has to do with relationships and partnerships and all that kind of stuff. And because we usually, people are so used to the 12-letter alphabet of astrology that Libra is usually kind of has an association with the 7th house. So Libra gets a very relational focus. I mean, I would kind of emphasize the Venus rulership of Libra to about the relational focus or whatever. But regardless of all that stuff, where you're getting the technique from, it is a stacked 7th house, this transit. And if we look at the major players here, we're having a Cazimi with Chiron and Mercury. And so Chiron, the wounded healer, there's got to be something coming up in this transit where your insecurities around relationships, where you feel like you're maybe not good enough, or maybe there's some kind of thing that happened in past relationships that has damaged your ability to be confident about being in a relationship with a partner or something like that. And there's something that is painful that you don't want to deal with, and it's going to be brought up probably. And Mercury is here. Mercury is the communicator, the messenger. And it's all happening in the sign of Aries, this Mars-ruled sign. So there's a much more of a decisive, critical quality. This isn't like, it's more about making a decision or saying what needs to be said and having some sort of a critical moment of insight, of revelation, of moving forward, of making some sort of critical, decisive action, or having an important conversation that really needs to be said. And I think, because it's the 7th house, it could be one of these hard relationship conversations, but it's a powerful moment. It's an important time, and it's worth noticing. If we look at the lichen girding, the Mercury is in Cazimi, but what houses does Mercury rule? In the context of this chart, for Libra rising, Mercury rules the 12th house and the 9th house which is interesting because both the 9th and the 12th have a lot to do with dreams, the subconscious, all this kind of, wishy-washy woo-woo stuff. Whereas the 7th house is much more concrete in being about this major relational focus. Whereas, you've got all these other things going on, like subconscious factors. Maybe also your religious, if you're religious at all, that could come into it. What are your higher principles, though, regardless of whether you're religious or not? What are your dreams and visions of the future, even as well. These are things which may not be as immediately obvious because the 12th house and the 9th house are empty in this chart, but I'm using techniques such as lichen girding to bring this back into focus so you can get a certain layer here that other astrologers may not be applying. Let me know if this is, you give me some feedback if this is at all relevant or not, if I'm wasting my time with this technique. Yeah. Okay, time for the next one. Hello, my fellow Scorpio risings. How are you doing? I hope you're not having as bad health problems as I've been having in the past year. Actually, to be honest, I'm doing a lot better these days. But when I see a sixth house lineup such as this for a Scorpio rising, one of the first things that comes to mind is, in fact, things to do with health. Um, Although my own recovery process is coming along quite nicely, I I have another colonoscopy, which means that some doctor is going to be looking up where the sun don't shine not too long from now in my own personal life. And so in some way it's fitting that this month in which I'm going to be having more medical examinations happening is starting off with this sixth house stuff, which has all to do with the physical health as well. It also has to do with some things like exercise and working out, doing chores as well, which may not be very nice. But it's also kind of like getting, going in to have somebody look up your butt is also kind of a chore in a way. So you can see how it fits with sixth house stuff. I'm sorry if I'm being too graphic, but we're Scorpios. Our sign rules the nether regions of the body, so we should be accustomed to this kind of stuff. I hope I'm not putting you, my fellow Scorpios, off. But regardless, I mean, I think you could look at this as a certain milestone in the healing process, because you've got the healing thing is coming up not only with the sixth house, but with Chiron, the wounded healer, being there at the same time. And we're going to be getting a Mercury Cazimi, which is like a critical insight about the healing that's happening. Like personally, I've been having some complications, and I'm not going to get into all the details, but there's certain things which maybe, I don't know, I've been having problems with inflammation generally, and making adjustments to my diet and trying to live, I don't know, I feel kind of beat up. I'm trying to live a healthier lifestyle. That's a big one too. Like trying to actually, oh my God, actually get out there, get out in the sun, get some vitamin D, get the blood flowing. This is all great because sixth house Aries stuff, because Aries, Mars, blood red, Mars rules the blood, the circular system. So it's a great time to get out, do some exercise, that kind of stuff. With Mercury, the communicator, though, there might be a sort of like critical insight about health issues. Like I'm having problems with inflammation. I'm almost wondering, am I going to have some sort of like aha, eureka, breakthrough moment where I'm like, wait a minute, why didn't I think of this? Maybe this thing is like the hidden piece of the puzzle that I've been missing for dealing with my inflammation problems. Maybe there's some sort of like breakthrough, or like, I don't know, maybe there's certain things, like I don't know if some of the drugs I'm on might have side effects or not, but maybe some of these things which are kind of ambiguous, which have been kind of confusing while Mercury was in Pisces, now we have a much more clear-headed Mercury. It's kind of, we've got an exalted sun also, mind you, that this is a Cazimi where the sun is exalted in Aries. So there's a kind of like out of this watery Neptune Pisces stuff and into the clear day where you're actually getting a clear message coming through. I think it's really promising anyways, and I'm hopeful about it. And I've been doing this thing where Mercury, applying Lacan girding to Mercury, and so in a Scorpio rising chart, we can look at the fact that Mercury rules the 11th house of Virgo, and it rules the 8th house of Gemini, and that we could say that there could be some potential here for these other themes to be addressed, even though these houses are empty, right? That if Mercury is in having a critical moment of insight, and Mercury rules our house that has to do with social networking, being parts of groups or bigger organizations, and it also has to do with the 8th house, which has to do, I mainly look at it as like addiction, dependency, that kind of stuff, that Mercury could be speaking on behalf of those topics in this moment of Cazimi, and I'm just applying this here because it's more of a subtle technique, but it could bring out some stuff that we may not be expecting if we don't dig that deep. So let me know how it goes for you. Do you notice any of these 11th house or 8th house things getting brought up in this Mercury Cazimi moment? Does that make sense for you in general at all or not? Let me know what you think. Otherwise, whatever, I'm just going to keep going here. Sagittarius risings. So you get you've got a new moon in Aries with with Mercury and Chiron, Cazimi, all happening soon. It's going to be interesting. The fifth house is a house that generally stands for things like your kids. It stands for things like play and having fun, creative projects as well. And what comes up for me in all of this is that Aries, as a sign, actually has like sort of a youthful thing going for it, because often the image of the ram was also, like a ram has horns and is tough and likes to butt his head and stuff, but it's also the lamb is kind of like an Aries symbol as well, which is more of the young and innocent and playful little Aries lamb. And so when you have a Sag rising, there's a focus on the playful side of Aries with Aries in the fifth house. But here we have a Chiron and Mercury thing happening. And I was thinking, it depends basically if we're talking about people that are, let's say, people with parents and who have kids versus people who don't have kids. Because I was thinking that if you're a parent, that a new moon and, Mercury Cazimi with Chiron, the focus could actually be on your children rather than yourself. And because of the Chiron influence and the Mercury influence, there's the communicator and the wounded healer. The communicator could be like a critical communication about your children. And maybe with Aries, you got that young Mars energy, like maybe your kid's acting up at school and you have to have like a parent interview, and that your parent, like the critical, like, did you know your son, steals the other kid's lunch money? And you're like, oh my God, I didn't have to, whatever, right? That's one possible way it could go. Or some dealing with some kind of issues with kids. Another possible issue, I think, with the wounded healer is that, this could be low-hanging fruit, but it could be your own inner child stuff. You don't have to. This is just how I'm going with this horoscope reading. It's pretty. You might as well go for the low-hanging fruit. It could be inner child stuff. If you look at the fifth house, which also has to do with play, and you look, I think there's a certain therapeutic potential when you combine this stuff together. There's certain forms of art therapy, fifth house with Chiron and this other stuff going on. Like, you could be doing stuff which combines the playfulness, the creativity with something therapeutic, or like there's this quality where you could not even be intending to be doing therapeutic artwork, but you could like create something and then notice like an emotion coming out in what you created, and then kind of spend some time observing your creation, and then you become more aware of something that's trying to come out through your art, and it's sort of like this sort of like drawing out process of becoming more aware of what's going on with you when you're in that state, when you're making art, and you're kind of learning about yourself through the process of creating. And that it's I like fifth house has this sort of attitude where the point of play is you're not playing, you're playing for the sake of playing, you're not playing for the sake of some therapeutic outcome, right? But the Mercury and Chiron bring that into it, that there could be either a therapeutic quality or some sort of insight, like a revelation, a eureka, aha moment to do with it. Or it could also have to do with your relationship with your kids and stuff like that. Like I said, maybe like I'm talking about, maybe it just has to do with your kids, and there's some sort of communication that needs to happen with your children or something. I'm just kind of beating around the bush trying to like tease out what it could be, right? But that's some stuff to work on, or to go on. I was looking at Lichen girding for all these as well, where you look at what houses Mercury rules, and in a Sagittarius chart, Mercury rules the 7th house of Gemini, and it rules the 10th house of Virgo. So relationships and career focus, I don't know. Like, it's sort of like there could have, like, if, I mean, there's something about this either play therapy or working with the issues with your kids. The seventh house is obvious because if you're married or if you have a partner, then it also brings in the relationship of, like, it's not just you and your kids, but the other parent you're dealing with. And then there's also like your public life, your work life, and it's like how are you managing between career and family and relationships versus work, or are you giving enough time to play, or are you just bogged down with work stuff? These are all things which might tie in. I don't know. I mean, that's just how I'm reading it right now. Let me know what you think. I'm going to move on to the next one. Capricorn rising. You are having this new moon that also features a triple conjunction of the Sun, Mercury, and Chiron, otherwise known as a Mercury Cazimi. It's all happening in Aries. It's all happening in the fourth house. The fourth house is an angular house, which means that it's more impactful than if it was happening in a cadent or a succedent house. The angular house of the fourth has to do with your family, namely your parents, your ancestry, that kind of stuff. It also has to do with the physical space that you reside in, your actual home. And so when we have Mercury Cazimi is usually like a breakthrough of communication. And in Aries, there's a very decisive, assertive, critical, we're not wasting time here, right? And if you watched my earlier introduction to this, Mercury's racing through this sign. It's going to be, you only have like 10 days, 11 days in the sign of Aries. Usually Mercury takes longer. So it's just Mercury, any business to do with your family, but mainly more the focus of your own parents and your own family, of where you come from, your roots. There's something, whatever is going to come up, things are going to come up quickly, and they're going to be needed to be dealt with in this quick, efficient way. However, Chiron is there, and Chiron is the wounded healer. And so there's some sort of quality here where I don't have to think too hard about this one. It's another kind of low-hanging fruit situation, but when you apply the wounded healer to this, intergenerational trauma is going to be probably an issue. People actually talk about how relationships with your parents can be the most triggering thing, and it's in the sign of Aries. It's a Mars ruled sign, and the ruler of Aries is Mars. It's caught up with Saturn there. So there's this thing about Saturn being the adult, the father setting rules and being this resentful about your authoritarian parents or something like this. I mean, all this stuff could get triggered off by this transit, and you're going to have to deal with it. It could also have to do, rather than this intergenerational trauma stuff and wounds carried on throughout the family and the generations and all this kind of thing, it could actually do on a mundane level with the actual structural issues of the home itself. That you could actually have maybe some repair issues where you're gonna have to act quick with Mercury moving this fast too. Like, oh, holy shit, we need to get some work done quick because this is a problem, right? Like that could be a more mundane way that it's all going to turn out. And I was also doing this lake and girding thing this time. That there's if you look at the other signs that Mercury rules, like it's a critical time for Mercury, and Mercury rules the 6th house and the 9th house. The 6th house having to do with, like chores and physical health and the grunt work that people don't want to do. I mean, if it does have to do with mundane housing renovation issues, that could be very relevant. And the 9th house has to do with a kind of a higher guiding principle. And it was really interesting because if we're getting more into the direction of like therapeutic stuff with the family, like maybe there's something to, like, what are the principles of the family? As you get what I'm saying? Like, I think I was thinking when I was making this that so often that we strictly look at, in a therapeutic sense, with the family, people blaming their parents for messing them up and all these problems. But I think if you notice that Mercury actually rules the ninth house, there could also be something there that is there actually a valuable principle or life lesson, like something that your dad said to you when you were a kid that stuck, and that it sort of gives you a kind of a moral compass of how you're conducting yourself in the world, that could actually be an important factor here as well. I don't know. I'm just seeing what I could pull out of this using some techniques anyways. But that's my take on for Capricorn rising. Aquarius rising. You are having a new moon in Aries in the third house, which is made more interesting by the fact that we're having Mercury Cazimi together with Chiron at the same time. A lot of stuff happening. So primarily, the third house has to do with things like siblings, neighbors, your local community, that kind of stuff. And so it's highlighting that area. And Mercury has something to do of like a critical communication. Like a critical piece of information is going to come your way. But Chiron is also in the mix. And Chiron is the wounded healer. So this information could have something to do with something that is sensitive in a way. I'm not quite sure exactly what it could be. Maybe it all depends on, it could mean different things for different people. So getting into the specifics may be getting us off track. But there's a communication that has to do with your relationship with either, let's say, brothers and sisters. That is there a brother and sister that you don't get along with or something like that? There's Mars and Aries, the god of war. The ruler of Aries is Mars, and Mars is in a conjunction with Saturn while this is happening. So there's this sort of there's a kind of friction, a tension there as well. And it's also, Mars is like a very assertive, quick, fast kind of sign. So it's like there's going to be something like you're going to get a critical piece of information and you're going to have to act on it or deal with it and just do it efficiently. But it's also going to be sensitive. Like there's going to be some emotional stuff probably, or some sort of, it's like you want to just kind of like, let's just handle this business. But there's something about it that sort of like, it's a bit messy maybe. And I was thinking, I started using like and girding to sort of like see what other what other houses might be affected by this. We look at Mercury. And what does Mercury rule? Mercury rules the 8th house and it rules the 5th house, right? The 5th house has to do with play and having fun. It also has to do with kids. And the 8th house generally stands for things like, I look at addiction and dependency a lot with the 8th house and stuff. So let's just make it simple here. Let's say you're a parent. Let's say when this happens, you're talking to your neighbor over the fence, like it's like a home, the movie show Home Improvement. I don't know how, whatever. You're having the neighborly conversation with your neighbor over the fence, and your neighbor says like, "Hey Joe, like I don't know, thought you better know the other day I thought I saw your son out there who's just a wee lad at the tender age of 15 smoking a joint with his buddies or something. Maybe you better give him the talk or something." Like that could be what it is, because the 5th house brings in children, the 8th house brings in sort of addiction stuff. You could have like your neighbor like tip you off that you're like, I saw something about your kid there, maybe, and you're like, oh geez, I got to give my kid the talk or something, or I don't know, like I'm just gonna throw in something. This is like, I'm making up a story, right? And this may not be applicable, but this is sort of like bringing to, like, you're getting some communication from a neighbor or somebody who has that kind of a relationship to you, and it's something that is sort of like, it's like a sensitive piece of information that you're gonna, that you're like, oh geez, like it's like, I don't know. That's just something that comes to mind that I feel like works with the kind of dynamics, although that might not literally be exactly what it is. But maybe that can kind of tip you off to what it could be, right? And even if it isn't it on the head, right? Anyways, just a thought. I'm going to move on to the next one now. Hello, Pisces rising. we're going to have a new moon in Aries soon, and it's going to have an impressively interesting Cazimi with Mercury, and Chiron is getting on the mix as well. So you know what this means. It's happening in your second house. The second house has to do with your money, your belongings, and basically your means of providing for yourself. And so, what can we say? Mercury Cazimi usually represents a kind of a insight, a eureka moment, a kind of a breakthrough or a revelation. However, it is mixed up with Chiron. It's conjunct with Chiron. So there's a blending of the Chiron and the Mercury principles together. Chiron is the wounded healer. So it's going to be an insight. It's going to be a revelation, but it's going to be a revelation of something that you probably feel insecure about with Chiron in the mix, right? It's going to be something where you feel like, and all this stuff with the second house, it's going to have to do with your ability to make money, your ability to support yourself. You're going to have to you're going to have some sort of revelation about some place where you feel like you're insufficient in your ability to do this. Or if you have your own business, or if you work for somebody else, there could be issues around work. I mean, it could also be like very practical, technical things about the operation of your business. And because of this, Mercury's moving fast, as I pointed out in the introduction to this. So it could be something like there could be a critical thing that needs to happen to correct some sort of problem in the way the business runs at a more mundane level, right? I mean, that could be it as well. Or it could be also a maybe more psychological thing where your own, I don't know. I don't like get into this stuff. I know there's a lot of people who are like, I need to heal my relationship with money so I can manifest, like huge bags of money sacks falling from the sky into my lap and then be rich and then I don't have to work or something. But no, I don't necessarily think that's it, but there is a therapeutic thing that does have to do with money here, even if that's a topic that I am not usually that keen on. Maybe I have to look at that myself. Whatever. I'm not getting into my own bullshit with this, but okay. Mercury, I've been using this principle, this one of lake and girding, where I look at what houses Mercury rules. In Pisces, Mercury rules the 4th house of Gemini and the 10th house of, hold on. No, sorry, not the 10th house, the 7th house of Virgo. So the 4th and the 7th house have to do with your home life and also has to do with your relational life. So there could be certain things obviously, you're living your own living circumstances, especially if you're paying rent or something like that. You could there could be really basic cash flow kind of things like your ability to pay the bills and afford where you're living and what your living situation is like. And then the 7th house is more relational. So it's like, how do the relationships in your life how does your work life and your relation life fit together? Is your relationships like an obstacle for your work life, or do they kind of gel and work compatibly? And I don't know. I mean, the Mercury rules your partner though. So I mean, like maybe the insight about your work could be coming from your partner, or that could be another one. Maybe the communication is coming from your partner, but it has to do with your ability to make money, or it has to do with your ability to look after your belongings even. Like maybe you have too much stuff, and maybe that's what it's about. Maybe you're a hoarder and you need to get rid of some stuff, and that there's a wounded healing thing happening around your belongings or something. Not your ability to make money, but your ability to be like, why am I holding on to all this crap? That could be another thing. I don't know. Some ideas. There you go for Pisces this time. So, it's Aries season, and this is for Aries rising. I mean, you could also look for Aries suns. You could look at this, and it's your birthday coming up soon. I'm kind of using the Aries rising technique, but I mean, it could be applicable for both. But if you are Aries sun, happy birthday, I suppose. From the Aries rising point of view, the first house has all to do with you. Some people, I think, in astrology may make the whole chart all about you, but I mean, from a traditional perspective, the first house is you. The seventh house is your, partner. The fifth house is your kids. The fourth house is your parents, etc. So the first house is really self-focused on you, right? And we're going to be having a Mercury conjunct Chiron Cazimi, which is really interesting because, I mean, for a number of reasons, when things are conjunct like this, there's a blending of the energies. So Mercury is a messenger, and a Mercury Cazimi is usually like an insight, a personal insight. The personal side of it is going to be emphasized by the first house, and with Chiron, Chiron's the wounded healer. So there's something about being an insight about your own wounding, an insight about your own insecurities, an insight about your own sense of deficiency or insufficiency, of like where you don't feel good enough, where you feel like maybe you're not, you're not who you're supposed to be. You're just some big dumb baby who's like overgrown, and that you're an imposter, and that you're not good. Nobody takes you seriously, and you put up a tough fight, but you're really weak and whatever, right? Like this is all Chiron stuff, and it's gonna be Mercury is gonna be like. It's going to be coming to the forefront of your consciousness, and you're going to have some sort of critical insight. And I don't know, I'm getting maybe more personal with this kind of stuff, but I think that when I see all this stuff stacked in the first house, there's I think a therapeutic idea of a kind of a core wound that can happen, where often people have a sense of there could be a traumatic event in a person's life, and that ego or identification builds up around a wound where the person, I mean, to some extent, it may be fair enough that if you go through some shit, then you could start to think of yourself in terms of being defined as like, I've been a person who've been through some shit, and that I see myself in that context, and that defines who I am, and all this kind of stuff. But it's an identification, right? And so there's sort of like, it might be a time for some critical insight to be like how we identify with traumatic things that have happened in our life, and how we've created identity around trauma. And perhaps there could be some healing that could be done there. However, I'm not doing therapy for you. I'm just giving a horoscope thing, a horoscope reading. And so the amount of depth that I'm going to be going into it here is fairly limited. But that's what came up for me. If I've been applying this technique called lichen girding here to sort of draw in some other things here, to color it in. And Mercury is the ruler of the third house and the sixth house, which are empty here. But because Mercury represents those houses for an Aries rising person, that we can draw in some other deeper layers here. So Mercury rules the third house, which has to do with your relationship to things like siblings. Again, we're having this Chiron stuff of healing. You might look at your identity, how that was formed in relationship to other people in your family, such as siblings. And if, like, I think Chiron can also often be the sense of, like, whatever, like, insufficiency. Like, if you're like, oh, my siblings have their lives sorted out, but I'm the black sheep of the family, I'm the one with the problems, and what's my identity that I formed in relationship to siblings or other people that have that kind of like role in your life. And the sixth house has to do with basic health stuff as well. So there could be, it also has to do with like sort of like when you get into fights and arguments and stuff like that. That could the argument. It could also, so you put that together. It could be like, are there any long-standing quarrels or arguments with siblings and other people in your life, and have you built an identity in those conflicts? Could be another thing. The third house also is your environment, so it's also important to look at environmental factors of like is the environment that you're in something that supports you, or is it something that's detrimental? Like, is there certain, like, are you exposed to stuff in your daily life that is a good influence on you or a bad influence? Those are some other things that you might want to look at here. Yeah. Okay, so that's my take on Aries rising right now. Okay, so for Taurus rising, this new moon in Aries is happening in the 12th house. And it's not just a new moon in Aries, it's a new moon that also has Mercury Cazimi conjunct with Chiron, which is like kind of a doozy. Okay, Mercury Cazimi usually stands for an insight, a revelation, a breakthrough, a critical moment of having, aha. But the thing is, Mercury is combined with Chiron, so they're mixed together. And Chiron is the wounded healer. And so there's the insight, the revelation is going to have a kind of a therapeutic quality to it, where there's some kind of a wound. And the thing here is that we're talking about the 12th house, and the 12th house is like the depths of the psyche. So there could be wounds which are buried very deep here, which are getting set off by this transit. And that I think it's actually a very important time to be doing some sort of, I mean, if you're working with a therapist, that could be an applicable thing. If not, doing things like journaling. I don't do a lot of dream work stuff, but I think with the 12th house, it fits in. Where if you're maybe dream journals, where you're waking up and you're like, as soon as you wake up in the morning, you have a dream, you write out as much as you can so you don't lose it, or something like that. Like that because Mercury is the messenger, the scribe, that actually goes really well with this kind of this theme. So that's one thing I might recommend, is to get into dream journaling, or I don't know, like dream interpretations, to shed light on what might be really buried deep in the subconscious, or I don't know, anything else that you think might fit in with this kind of thing, could be applicable. But the 12th house stands for an area. It's another one of these blind spot ones where it's necessary to maybe take some extra measures, like looking at dreams and stuff like that, because it could just be like, if we're not making the effort, like maybe it's something that just stays in the subconscious, and then you act like the 12th house is kind of like you're acting something out unconsciously, and then the consequences of that is all this sort of stuff of like, life seems chaotic and out of control, and like you're getting yourself into trouble and stuff like this. Like I was talking to, like, I don't know, like I had to deal with some mental health stuff in my past, and I've got connections online of other people who've had to, and I've talked to people who are dealing with mental health stuff, and it's like, if you don't have impulse control, if you're not controlling your impulses, there could be unconscious forces which are acting for you, where you're not even in control of your life, because you're just acting out things totally unconsciously. And it's like, you end up, if you end up in all this trouble and all this mess because you're not even being accountable for your own actions. Now, I'm not saying all Taurus rising people are going to be having the same problem, but that's like the 12th house you have to look at when the 12th house is stacked like this, is an opportunity to be aware of what you're doing involuntarily. And if you can get some insight on that, you can be like, oh, wait a minute, like how, like maybe there's things that I didn't know that I could change or make adjustments to that can make my life better, because I thought all this stuff was outside of what was in my ability to have agency over. But like, if you can actually have agency over what is unconscious, it's like shadow work again. I don't want to you turn shadow work into a buzzword again, or just, as an easy thing to use for all these cadent houses or whatever. But I mean, yeah, it's a ripe time, I think, anyways, to be doing some shadow work, or to be working with the unconscious and all that kind of stuff for Taurus rising. I was also looking at like and girding for all of these. So if you look at what Mercury rules the second and the fifth here. So you've got Gemini, second house. That's, your belongings, making money and stuff like that. Fifth house is play, having fun, and these kinds of things. So I think there could be, I think it could be an opportunity to look at things like if you're compulsively shopping or spending or collecting or hoarding, then that could be an unconscious kind of second house area. Or if you're unconsciously if you're doing things like pleasure seeking or some kind of like childish activity, like, I mean, sometimes it's good to have play and fun and all this kind of stuff in your life, but it's like this question of like, is there something that's being avoided by that? That like your those activities are covering up something which is unconscious in the 12th house. Or, I mean, it could also, like, I was also saying for another chart that, like, you could bring in play as art therapy, where you could, like, bring in using, without the explicit intention of doing something therapeutic, you could, like, just go at it and start painting stuff. And then afterwards, you're like, whoa, what was all this stuff coming out when I was painting? Like, that you could use creative stuff as a way to, like, access the unconscious. Or to like dredge up all the stuff from the depths and like throw it onto the page as a way of working with it, right? Because the fifth house is implicated, being a Virgo ruling the fifth house and Mercury being the ruler of Virgo, these kind of techniques could also be applicable. Although I'm kind of getting into some overlap here with some of the other chart readings I've done. But whatever, I don't know. I'm kind of getting near the end of it here. That's my take for Taurus. Now I'm off to do Gemini now. Okay, Gemini rising. There is going to be an Aries new moon, and Aries is the 11th house for you using this whole sign system. It's not just a new moon in Aries, though. You also have a Mercury Cazimi, and Chiron is getting in the mix as well. You can see the Sun, Mercury, and Chiron all at 12 degrees there. It's a pretty intense combination. Now, the 11th house has to do with your support system, your network of those who are there to help you reach your goals and ambitions in life. And so it's to have a new moon in this area is actually a pretty optimistic thing. The Mercury Cazimi could come across pretty well because it's like an important communication, Mercury being the messenger. And in the 11th house, it's a communication with somebody who plays a role as somebody who's either like a mentor or a counselor or somebody there who's there to assist you and help guide you on your way to fulfilling your purpose in life and all this kind of stuff. So it's actually a pretty positive thing, I would say. And the Mercury is mixed up with Chiron. Again, as I was saying, Chiron is the wounded healer. So that has a very therapeutic potential that something could come up that is the healing process of, 11th house is all about your hopes and ambitions and your dreams and stuff like that. And so maybe there's healing that needs to be done around that. And it could go in either way. Like in some cases, maybe a person may sell themselves short. Maybe a person has lost hope. Maybe the person doesn't have a lot of ambition. Maybe a person doesn't have a lot of motivation in life. And that there could be a critical communication healing these issues around where you're wounded in your dreams and ambitions, where you're kind of like, I don't know if I could achieve that. I don't know if I have what it takes. Or also, there could be things where, maybe the other side of the coin is that our dreams and ambitions are actually fairly unrealistic, and that maybe you're trying to aim for something that isn't right for you, or that you're misguided in some way, or you have the wrong idea, and that you have a critical insight or realization where you're like, what? Oh, wait a minute. That's why it wasn't working. That's why. Why didn't I see that before or something? Why was I good? Like, you're trying to chase this thing and you're like getting frustrated and you don't know why you're having so much problems, but you have this insight or revelation around it. I mean, that could be something that happens. Um, it could also be, making a new connection with 11th house, and then, like, maybe there's like the Chiron stuff needs to happen, but right now it's like that. It's like there's some sort of a resistance to working with Chiron, but it could be with this 11th house stuff that like a new circumstance presents itself in which that you can work with the therapeutic potentials here, have some sort of insight, have some sort of like more awareness coming through, and there's like a new opportunity that will help facilitate this to happen for you. So I'm looking at this fairly positively for Gemini risings. I've also looking at what houses Mercury rules through a technique called like and girding. And Mercury rules the first house and the fourth house in a Gemini rising chart. So the first house is all about you, yourself, your self-identity in your even your physical body and stuff. And the fourth house has to do with your relationship to your parents and your family. And so this is just a technique that I use to sort of unlock some more meaning that, wouldn't be immediately apparent if I didn't do this, but that could be some sort of therapeutic potential, like maybe meeting a new counselor or having a breakthrough with one you're already working with. But it's an important thing to work with and pay attention to because it will spill over into areas of your life, like your relationship with your family, your relationship with your roots, your home life, as well as your sense of self, your basic sense of identity. So all in all, I think it's a great opportunity, and I'm making these horoscopes to try to alert people to what's happening so that when this Cazimi happens, there's certain things you can do, like you could be doing journaling and stuff like that, or with 11th house it could be more of actually working with somebody in your life who plays this sort of helper counselor role. Maybe could work, right? Okay, thank you very much. That's the last one for me today. Thank you.